Now, before I start even on processing fluency, we've been talking about what is the research contribution, what is theoretical research. So let me even talk about when we publish a paper, the reviewers and the editors are going to actually ask, where do you have a contribution and where is your contribution? There are many ways to make a contribution. You can make a methodological contribution, meaning that the methods that you use is actually very new, and you're going to introduce other people to this method. So now, the method that you use may actually not be new in the scientific community, but it's actually new in marketing, and that could be a contribution, all right? If you're combining two different things, and now even though these two things have been actually separately used, but this is the first time that you're combining it, that could also be a methodological contribution. So now we understand how to do surveys or interviews and whatnot online, but 15 years ago, people who do qualitative research had no idea how to do a non-face-to-face interview, and so there is a tutorial written up called ethnography, so meaning how do you do ethnography on the internet, and that was a methodological contribution. All right, it teaches people how to do things. So that's one thing. Another is a substantive contribution, meaning whatever you're doing, it is not creating new knowledge from a theoretical perspective, but it actually has important implication for society. For example, you say, I can demonstrate what we can do to help people stop smoking. Now, this is a very important societal problem. Quit smoking, or not do drugs, or lose weight. And so you may be using theory that other people have established and tested and demonstrated in the lab, but it has never been demonstrated that this actually can work, because you can say, well, there is lots and lots of paper on self-control. So whatever you're doing to help people using self-control to stop smoking, none of that is actually new. It's all in the literature, but you are demonstrating it in a very important applied setting. So that is what we call a substantive contribution. Then there is work that makes a theoretical contribution, meaning you're contributing to our understanding of what is going on in the world that can be generalizable. It is a theory, so it is not just confined to marketing water. What I do to market water can be used to market medical equipment, to fertilizer, because I am really it's an understanding of how people respond. All right? So you can actually really make contribution in all these areas, and not just in theoretical contribution. I'm going to share with you my experience just because that's the only thing that I know. I don't know how to do other things. My methods are very traditional. I use ANOVA, regression, so it's not that I'm making any methodological contribution. I could be running a series of 2x2 study. There is nothing new about the method, but what I am bringing to the table is something that extends prior theory. All right, so because that's my expertise and that's the only thing that I know, I'm going to actually talk about how do you do theoretical research. Everybody will say that they do theoretical research, right? And so we don't have a real consensus, but clearly some people's research have more impact than others. Because maybe other people, because we all think that we're great researchers, but the reviewers don't think so, right? We all think we're doing theoretical research. So So let's actually talk about, well, what does it mean to actually do theoretical research. And so what I have prepared for you, and I think, do you have handouts? Right. So then what is a theory? Because theoretical research, meaning that I am contributing, I am either developing new theory or I am testing a theory. Now, a theory is really just some statements about relationship, right? That doesn't mean that it actually has been tested, is well validated, it's just a theory, okay? So in order to make contribution, then you have to produce empirical evidence to say that this is true and it is generalizable. So going back to the basic, what is a theory? Or what is, so a lot of times we ask, what is your model? So a theoretical model is really a specification of, now this is a word that's is very new to many of you, it's a nomological network. That means, so think about, so get rid of the word nomological, just think about it is a network, right? But it is a network that explains or specifies relationship between two things. So whenever we talk about relationship, that means we can't have one thing. We have to have at least two things, all right? So that means you need two things, and we call these things constructs. A construct is a very abstract term. So for those of you who, maybe train in SEM and whatnot, so you have your latent variable, right? The latent variable is something that we cannot observe. It is something very abstract, and that is a construct. A construct is the thing that we actually are truly interested in, but we can't see it, we can't feel it. We can attempt to measure it. The minute we start to measure, that measure is a variable. So the difference between a construct and a variable is the construct is the thing that we are really interested in. That is a psychological construct. But in order to understand this construct, we have to find ways to operationalize it and then to observe it. And that observation is a variable. Now, a construct can be measured by many variables. There are many different ways to measure it. There are many different ways to operationalize it. So, for example, if my construct, I'm interested in involvement. Involvement is a very abstract construct, right? There are many ways to actually manipulate or vary involvement. So if we look to the literature for some guidance, there is the elaboration likelihood model, the ELM, and it talks about involvement is really motivation. So we are very motivated about something. So it says, well, there is the ability, opportunity, and what is the third one? Interest. Time. That's opportunity. So ability. I'm supposed to be teaching this, right? We have, I think it's motivation. I think elaboration. So it's motivation, which is the interest, motivation, opportunity, and ability. All right. So these things together will actually, when will we elaborate our processing of certain information? That's when we are involved in it, right? This involvement can come about because we're motivated. It has personal relevance. It is important to me. If I don't do this, I am going to go home and get yelled at by my partner, by my parents, or by my kids, right? So we're personal. But then having the motivation is not enough. We have to have the ability to do it. So let's say if I started lecturing in Chinese, you are very motivated, but you have no ability. All right, so that won't work. But then even if I'm doing it in English and you're really motivated, and then all of a sudden the fire alarm rings, And now we have to rush out, and so we just don't have the opportunity to do that, right? So if you actually think about involvement, then we can actually use any of these things to now operationalize involvement, right? So then we can measure a number of things, and each one of them eventually will allow us to tap the construct of involvement, but they are all different. Now, so a construct can be measured by multiple variables, but each variable could be a proxy for multiple constructs, and that's the crazy thing, all right? So that means there is never a straight one-to-one mapping. So let me give you an example of how a variable could actually represent different constructs. I'm going to take expertise. We can measure expertise in two ways. There is the objective expertise. I can have 100 questions, and I can actually see who can answer these questions very well, versus those people get 95 of the 100 correct, and then there are people who get only 10 out. So 95% correct, these are the experts, right? So objectively I could measure. I could also ask people to self-report. Well, how knowledgeable are you? Do people around you consider you to be an expert, right? So I can actually, so now I have expertise. Now, what does expertise represent then? Because on one hand, expertise could actually be a proxy for motivation, for interest, because what made me an expert in the first place is because I'm motivated and I'm interested, and so it could be a proxy for motivation, right? But it could also be a proxy for ability. Now, expertise is a funny thing, because if I wanted to actually see, well, I'm going to give you something to read about, let's say, cancer prevention. And if you are an expert, are you going to spend more time or less time on it? You could spend more time because you're interested in it, right? And you can understand it. But you can also spend less time than a novice because you say, well, I already know this. So this is actually not interesting to me. So then if I actually just run one study and I actually use expertise to represent involvement or motivation, then you can interpret the data in multiple ways. So that is actually not very helpful, right? Although it would be useful to actually know, what expertise does. So that means I need at least another study that does not operationalize motivation or involvement using expertise. I have to use something else, right? But you can see the expertise can be representing different construct, and then you can see a construct can represent different things, right? So that means there is no one perfect study. We always need multiple studies to be convincing. And convergence and triangulation is what makes people feel that, yes, I am going to believe what you're telling me, because I can find fault with one study, but I cannot find fault with all the studies. Now, I may be able to find fault with all the studies, but the fault that I find is a different fault every time. So then the parsimonious explanation is the one that you offer me, so I'm going to give it to you. Okay? So that's why it's important to, first of all, understand what is the theory, what is your model. So everybody will be, the reviewer will say, what exactly is your model? This is actually unclear. And that may be because you never really specify exactly what your model is, and then what your operationalization is.
So when you say theory in this context, it seems to me it is the intuition or reason that we provide for the relationship between X and Y. Is that right?
I don't have a reason. Right now, I have no reason. I am only mapping there is a relationship, right? So even in behavioral research, there is a line of research that we call behavioral decision theory or judgment decision. So they focus on the phenomena. They said, if we see this, we see that. It is all right.
Okay,
So they don't
observe that
explain.
in practice first.
Or even in a study, there is lots of studies that actually tell us that there is a relationship between A and B. It does not tell us why. It does not tell us how. Okay. So now that is also a model. That is also a theoretical model. But at the most basic level, that's all you have.
Okay.
You can say we can say if A causes B, but do I have any evidence other than they co-vary? Now, there is actually I want to make a point. Society at large cares about main effects. Main effects are capturing exactly that. That means it doesn't matter where. I always observe this. People who do theoretical research do not like main effects. And the reason
What do
is,
you mean by main effect? The
so,
things you observe.
so let's say if I draw a smiley face, and let's say I'm a waitress. If I draw a smiley face on the check, and you guys come to my restaurant, and I believe drawing a smiley face, you give me more tips. So smiley face, more tips. Okay? Now, a main effect is I always observe smiley face, more tips. But I don't know why, right? Now, can you come up with reasons why a smiley face get more tips? Give me one reason.
The person becomes happy for some reason, the customer is happy, and that happiness translates into...
Okay, so you're happy because you see the smiley face makes you happy. When you are in a good mood, you feel good. You feel good. You feel good, then you decide to be more generous.
Yes.
Okay, so that may be one reason. Another reason?
I feel appreciated. I feel appreciated as a customer.
You feel appreciated, so I'm reciprocating.
Yes.
So you're nice to me, I'm nice to you. Okay? Another reason?
Somebody who's definitely a gratitude for a good service that's done.
Okay, so I consider this to be good service too because you put in the effort. So, right? So you can see a main effect. We can have many explanations for a main effect. So theoretical researchers who care about why we don't like main effects because there could be a million reasons. Society cares about it because society said we always see this.
So when you say we don't like main effect as academic,
We meaning theoretical researchers. Because we say, well, if I say it makes me happy, and therefore we have right away alternative explanation and say, well, that's not the right reason. We can come up with other reasons. So then it's not convincing. Whatever I say is not convincing. So when you do theoretical research, you like to see interactions effects. Because you can explain a main effect, but it's harder to counter an interaction effect. Because if I can actually say, well, it only happened under this condition, but not under that condition, and under this condition, people are just, they are in a bad mood, and right? So now you create more nuance in your explanation. It's harder for a reviewer to actually can come up with something that could explain your interaction.
So that means like a moderator.
Yes, that means a moderator. Okay? It could be a moderator, it could be a boundary condition. Okay? I mean, in a way, they are similar. Okay? So you can actually think about doing theoretical research is you want to specify your hypothesis so that you can demonstrate you know more about it than other people. And so you want to actually not just have this as a model. And then, so this is what I meant by each construct can be manifested by multiple variables, and each variable can represent multiple constructs. And so now, how do you develop a good theory? It really is a process. Now, first we go into the literature, we read about it, and so what you want to do is start with a construct, start with one thing. So even though the theory has two things, you start with one. You learn a lot about that. When we actually have a construct, in order for me to really understand this construct, I have to know what affects it. I also need to know what it affects. That means I need to know what are the antecedents to the construct. I want to know what are the consequences of the construct. Now, so think about it. The minute I have antecedents, then I have things leading to this construct, right? Now I have other arrows. If I have consequences, I have one, I may have other ones, right? So when you see antecedents, consequences mapped out, that is a nomological network. That is, you're saying this is how all these different variables or constructs are linked together. Antecedents may be correlated, but they may be not, and chances are they are not. Okay? Because if they are correlated, then they may actually be manifestation of the same thing. Okay? So, but the more you know about the construct, then the richer is your nomological network. Right? And so,
excuse me, Angela.
mm-hmm.
Do we need to have antecedents which correlate to the consequence? So one antecedent correlates to its consequence, then second and third and fourth, so and so forth? Or do we need to have one antecedent which correlates to multiple consequences? How do we find this out?
So if I have a construct A and I have construct B and I'm claiming that A leads to B.
Yeah.
And let's say I have many antecedents. If these are antecedents, each one of them should have the same consequence. Right? But my A may have more than one consequence. Right? I may actually have C. But B and C may not be correlated. Right? Because they may actually be moderated by different things. Right? So, but that is why I start with one construct, and before you know it, you actually know a lot more other constructs.
So the construct, does it always go to be concept, or can it be something very tangible, say advertising? Can it be a construct?
What is advertising?
Abstract.
Advertising is a variable.
Advertising expenditure.
So advertising expenditure is a variable. So advertising expenditure is how much money you spend. So you have to actually break it down. How are you spending your money? Are you spending it on lots and lots of exposure? Are you spending it on developing kind of a scenario, telling a story, right? So then that money is so generic, right? It doesn't tell us what the psychological construct is. But that is what our colleagues actually study, advertising expenditure and sales. And I always think, well, it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, how can you actually talk about advertising effectiveness when maybe the ad copy is just rubbish, right? Maybe, because in behavioral research we talk about framing effects, and we know they do A/B testing, right, at the minimum. So advertising expenditure is not a good construct.
Or maybe something like attitude towards advertising.
Okay.
Maybe accept.
But attitude towards advertising, you're talking about so is it attitude toward advertising in general? I just hate advertising, or is it advertising toward this particular advertising, right? So yes, my attitude towards advertising then will be a consequence of what's in the advertising, right? Okay. So then a good theory is a process. You get to know the construct, and then you start testing to see whether this relationship holds, and you want to offer multiple tests so that you know that it is not idiosyncratic to the stimulus that you're using. It is not idiosyncratic to the particular students that you actually bring into the classroom and say, now this is very important, my life depends on it, and if you all actually give me good answers, I'm going to take you out to dinner. That's not going to work, right? So, okay. All right. So are we clear in terms of kind of the basic thinking about approaching research?
So when we are tempted to think about a phenomenon, we have to pin down to the psychological stuff behind it.
Eventually.
If you are into behavioral research.
Eventually. Because
the marketing science people will look at variables rather than constructs, I guess.
yes, we are all looking at variables, but we try to infer the construct.
We go down to the
That's right.
psychological.
So that makes contributions too. So I'm not saying that
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. Then now I want to actually tell you a little bit about processing fluency, and I want to give you the background. So it has a lot to do with how we process information. So think about we are exposed to some advertising information, and that information kind of gets into our working memory. So think about a computer. There is the RAM, then there is the CPU. This is the RAM. The long-term memory is the CPU. The RAM has limited capacity, so we can only hold a limited amount of information in our short-term memory. But if we care about it enough, we can now store it in long-term memory. And our long-term memory has, as far as we know, unlimited capacity. We have not bumped up against any constraint. So how do we get things into working memory? Working memory here, I'm talking about kind of conscious. It depends on signal strength. So I'd be talking to you like this, and all of a sudden I do. Everybody pays attention, right? That's signal strength. Vividness, so bright colors, things that have huge contrast, that gets our attention. If it's something new, we've never seen this before, that gets our attention. Something that's repeated, then this gives us the opportunity to rehearse it. All of them will promise to process it, and then it will. If we elaborate on it, which is based on motivation, opportunity, and ability, it gets stored in long-term memory. The way that we use information stored in memory, again, depends on how often were we exposed to it, how recently were we exposed to it, when we were exposed to it, how much elaboration did we spend on, because think about every piece of information we store in memory, think about it as a little note. The more times we elaborate on it, that note gets bigger and bigger and bigger. All right. So when something is very big, it's very accessible. Then we can retrieve it more easily. And then, really, any judgment and choice is a combination of what we're seeing in front of us as well as what we actually know from memory. Right. So this is a very basic way of how people process information.
Excuse me. If you look one to one, just top of mind awareness, where do you fit in this continuum?
So top of mind awareness, we're going to actually come to it. It is really a retrieval of memory. There are many different types of memory. What did you have for dinner last night?
That is the only thing what we are having. last week. Very easy question.
Okay, so let me actually ask, what was the last movie that you saw?
That is tough.
Okay. So when I ask something like that, you have to go back to that incident, right? There is a spatial temporal context to it. So last night or yesterday or something, and then you know where and when. Top of mind awareness is name 5 brands of shampoo.
Oh yeah, so we started with L'Oreal, we started with Head and Shoulders, Clinic Plus, right, Cage Company, and so 3 companies.
Okay, so where does that come from? So now the first thing, what did you have for dinner? What was the movie that you saw? That was what we call episodic memory. It has a spatial temporal tag to it. Top of mind awareness is just general knowledge, is how much you can remember. That is semantic memory. Okay? So it's a different kind of memory. So if I were to actually ask, what is the capital of France? Everybody will know that, it will tell me it's Paris. When did you know this? You don't remember. So all memory started with episodic memory, but eventually when we lose that tag, all that is remained is the semantic memory. Semantic memory is one form of implicit memory. That means when we retrieve it, we have no context of when we acquired it and how we acquired it. Okay?
But one key question to it. For example, the moment you ask Mr. What are the 5 brands I can recall, right? That is what Roma is. I may not be using L'Oreal, right?
Right.
But still L'Oreal comes first. So what might be the connection to it?
So why did L'Oreal came first? It goes back to probably you were exposed to it very frequently. Maybe before you walked in, there was a big poster that says L'Oreal shampoo, right? There is a recency effect. And maybe for some reason, because people have been talking about it. So these things actually make it very, very salient and very accessible. And that is the reason why that was the first brand that came to mind. Okay? So now, when we actually look at advertising effectiveness, basically, we want to see how it affects judgment, how evaluation, and how it affects choice. But advertising exposure affects something in memory. We process it, we store it. And then later on, when we make our decision, when was the last time you went into the store and you're trying to choose which brand of cereals, let's say, and you ask yourself, wait a minute, what commercial did I remember seeing? Do we do that? Never. We never do that. And the funniest thing was, for decades, that was actually how advertising agencies measure advertising effectiveness. Because there is something called a day after recall. Someone will call out or intercept people and say, did you watch this program? If you say yes, if you say no, they go away. If you say yes, they say, what commercials do you remember seeing? If you name that commercial that they're interested in, the brand they're interested in, they will say, well, what do you remember about the commercial? What was the association positioning? If you do not name that brand, they will cue you. They will say, do you remember seeing a shampoo ad? Do you remember what brand? Right? This is all about what commercial do you remember seeing? And yet consumers never actually say, wait, I mean sometimes maybe, wait, what commercials? We always make decisions based on what we know, your top of mind awareness, right? And so we were not measuring advertising effectiveness correctly. Okay. So this is episodic memory, and another term is explicit memory. What did you have for dinner last night? Implicit memory. It does not involve conscious recollection, and we infer you have memory by some improved performance on a task. If people who have been exposed to this ad, when we ask them name 5 brands of shampoo, they're more likely to name the advertised brand compared to those people who actually were not exposed to the commercial. We know that they must have memory of it even though they can't remember when we ask them. Okay? Or I said, well, complete this word with the first brand that comes to mind. Handy. Okay? So those who have been exposed to the commercial may be more likely to be able to complete it. That is how we infer you have memory of it. And this is what we call implicit memory. Now, you may be using explicit memory to help you with the implicit memory task, right? But we do have evidence in the literature that they are actually different. It's going to be on the next slide. But I'm going to make a distinction between 2 types of implicit memory. One is conceptual and the other is perceptual. Perceptual implicit memory is inferred by improved performance on identifying something perceptually, either visually or orally. Conceptually driven implicit memory, memory is inferred by how quickly it comes to mind about that particular piece of information or related information. Alright, so the top of mind awareness would be a conceptually driven, not a perceptually driven implicit memory. And we have evidence in the literature that explicit and implicit memory are distinct. This is not, one is not a subset of the other. Amnesic patients, by definition, have no episodic memory, and yet their implicit memory is actually quite intact. Certain drugs, when people take Valium, they won't be able to remember episodic memory, but they can do implicit memory. In the development and aging literature, episodic memory is the last for little kids to have. It's the first one for us to lose when we get old, right? We all have experience of our elderly parents, grandparents. They know how to function, but they forgot what happened yesterday, right? If we look at brain patterns, if I show you a list of brands and I track your brain patterns, based on how your brain patterns, I can know which of the brands you will remember later. But based on the brain patterns, the other brain patterns, I can't predict your implicit memory performance. Okay? They also respond differently as to different independent variables, to different manipulations. So this is what we call functional dissociation. As a function of certain variables, they are different. And statistically, if I know your explicit memory performance, I won't be able to predict your implicit memory performance, and vice versa. Statistically, they are uncorrelated. Your explicit and implicit memory. So we know that we are very different, these things. So let me give you an example. Let's say some of you read list A, some of you read list B, and then later on, I flash the word Tiffany very quickly on a computer screen and I ask you to identify it. Who can identify with higher likelihood? List A, right? So this is what we call a perceptual implicit memory at work. You are relying on your perceptually driven implicit memory. Now, I can give you a different test. Some of you see list A, some of you see list B, but I now flash the word hamburger. And some of you could actually identify the word hamburger with higher probability. Guess who? List B. Now, you did not see, those who saw list B did not see the word hamburger, you saw McDonald's. But McDonald's is so closely tied to hamburger, it cues hamburger even when you were reading McDonald's. And that is why you can now identify hamburger. And this is your conceptual implicit memory. And and they are very different. So what's the big deal? Why do we actually care about it? We care about it because implicit memory affects brand choice, and they affect judgment. And because implicit memory, we have two types. We have the perceptual and the conceptual, and they actually affect different types of brand choice. So let me show you. Now, some of you are in condition A, you see the word hunter. And some of you see he threw the case of hunter at the back of his truck and drove off. Now I Googled, I looked at the Indian brands of beer. So I hope you actually would recognize, you would think that I wouldn't have known. All right, so which condition will lead to greater brand choice of hunter later? Take a guess. Those who saw hunter or those who saw the sentence, he threw the case of hunter at the back of his truck and drove off?
Condition B.
B. A. How many of you say A? Why A? Why hunter? Why just seeing the brand name hunter is going to help brand choice?
It's probably not a very recognized brand.
Just assume that it is. I guess it's also because it's a very complicated sentence.
Statement, this is a single word.
It's a single word, it's
And
easy.
it's also not recognized.
It's not recognized, so my apology. Let's actually change it to something that we can
Yeah,
recognize.
just make it
Kingfisher.
Kingfisher. Make it Kingfisher. That
King-
makes-
Kingfisher.
Bira for the prudence and right? Bira.
Bira, yeah,
Bira.
Bira.
You can today go for a bira.
The only thing is that when you say Bira,
Which one? How do I spell it?
My name may not be the user, sir.
B
B-I-R.
B
B for Bombay.
B-I-R-A.
B-I-R.
B
I for India.
I
R for Russia. And A for America.
Bira.
That's the best.
Okay. And I'm going to say he threw the case of. It's hard
I've
to.
written a case of bira, that's why I'm noting.
No, but we didn't ask you for the next one.
That is why I'm going for condition B now.
Okay. What do you mean? Never mind. I'm going to just assume that it works. Okay. So those of you who said condition A still holds, even though I use Vera, or you didn't change your mind? So it's easy to process, you recognize it, you know what it is. So how many of you think that condition B is going to actually work better? And why?
It's different, it actually creates a story in your mind, so you'll be able to figure out.
Okay, so it creates a story, you elaborate on it, you right away imagine someone doing that.
It's an activity or something.
So it's an episode, so you elaborate on it. You know, guess what? Both of you are right. Now, I'm going to show you. If you ask which brand of beer would you like, this is what we call a memory-based choice. So you go to the bar and you want to order a beer, and so then if you are relying on top of mind awareness, then whatever that comes to mind is going to actually be the one brand that you choose. When that is the case, during prior exposure, if you have been elaborating on it, and the story, you know, the visual image that prompts you to automatically elaborate, that is going to have top of mind awareness. But if I were to actually give you which of the following brands would you like, and I give you the list, then that is what we call a stimulus-based choice, because all your options are in front of you. Then the one that actually matches what you saw earlier, which is just the brand name Bira, is going to get chosen, because that is going to pop up. So depending on whether it is a stimulus-based or a memory-based. So in a memory-based choice situation, you can see that the sentence works better. In a service-based choice, this single word, single branding works better. Alright, so this suggests that we really rely on different types of memory, even in a simple, everyday decision that we actually make about brands.
Do you see the role of consideration set as well?
Of course, first of all, it actually affects consideration set. The idea is in the memory-based choice, it helps to get into the consideration set. Here in the service-based choice, unless you're very, very loyal, you're not going to go outside what is given to you. So what is given to you would be your presumed consideration set, right? Okay. So we actually do see such difference between the two ways that you actually present brand information to the consumer. So here the hypothesis that we actually have shown evidence for is perceptual fluency helps stimulus-based choice, conceptual fluency helps memory-based choice. But now I want to actually show that fluency also helps evaluation. Because when we actually look at choice situation, that clearly was not reflective of evaluation, right? That is just, it is more likely to be in the considerations that I actually choose it more. But is there any evidence? So I want to present evidence that fluency also helps evaluation. And that's kind of the paper that I asked you to read in the Liam group. Did you find the first study awfully complicated? You think, what is she thinking? Why is she in the right mind would come up with such a complicated thing? So, but what was I trying to do? If I want to show, let's see, if I want to show conceptual fluency, now we know perceptual fluency enhances evaluation from the literature. There is a very big literature called the mere exposure effect. That means the more times we see something, the more we like it. So that is well established. And you can actually say that, is it, I'm going to argue that it is a perceptual fluency that enhances evaluation. But we have not shown, we have not seen conceptual fluency leading to affecting judgment. And the first demonstration was in Whittlesey. What he did was he showed people this, a sentence, and then he asked them to evaluate how pleasant is the word boat compared to another condition when he showed them, and then they were asked to evaluate, so tell me how pleasant is the word boat. Now what is the difference between the two sentences?
Context.
Context. The first one is, even if I don't show you the last word, you can guess what the last word is. But it's hard to actually guess. He could have saved up money and buy anything, right? So the fact that we now anticipate boat and we see boat, that boat is conceptually fluid. We have not seen it, but we feel that that word is coming up, right? So it is more readily available to us. And that's the conceptual fluency, and they show that it leads to greater pleasantness rating. So if I wanted to demonstrate conceptual fluency, and it's really not, so you can look at the stormy sea tossed the boat, and now you see the word boat. You know that I knew it was boat, and now it's boat. So it could be that the fact that I guessed it, and I guessed it right, I could feel good about it, and that's why I think this is a nicer word. It has nothing to do with conceptual fluency, but it has everything to do with mood. So you put me in a good mood, I also like it more. So how else can I test conceptual fluency?
Psychedelic effect.
Okay. So there are, you see, there are many explanations for it, right? So if I really wanted to show there is conceptual fluency effect, then I need to come up with other ways to test this. So in the first study, I did what Whittlesey did because it's important that I replicate prior findings. But I also find other ways to operationalize conceptual fluency. And the way that I did it was, okay. So how do I test for perceptual fluency? Don't look at your slides. If I want to test perceptual fluency that it increases liking, what should I do? If I want to show perceptual fluency leads to increased liking.
I have to show some advertisements, some pictures.
Right. So basically I have to show people things and then test them, and then what do I compare it with? Compare it with things that they have not seen earlier, right? So it is a prior exposure that I need to manipulate. What do I do with conceptual fluency? How can I do that? So the predictive context is one way. Associations, right? So things that are related. So like the McDonald's and hamburger, that will be another way, right?
Or color with a brand. Or a specific color with a particular brand.
Okay, so if I know that a brand has certain colors and is tightly associated with something, I'm going to actually show that as a highly associated thing, right?
Coke red.
Right. Okay, so I find things that are related to it, then I can actually show conceptual fluency. Then I also need to rule out alternative explanation, right? So prior exposure, I can use semantic related stimuli, predictive context, and I want to rule out feeling good about guessing the word correctly. And this is what I try to do when I design the study, right? So when I design the study, I have to take all of this into consideration. And so think about example of a stimuli. So that means I have to have a neutral context. I have to have a predictive context, right? Then I have to have either the target word in the sentence is the same word, or I want them to actually evaluate the word read. They did not see the word read, but read is related to book. Or I give them a completely unrelated word, napkin, right? So I have to design a study that will allow me to test all of these things. Does it make sense? Okay. So then